Again, thank you for coming. I do have some housekeeping. I am Curtis Clough, the real Curtis Clough. Those of you at the award ceremony yesterday, you saw my wife walk across stage to get my award. Unfortunately, I'm also the Associate Superintendent at Silver Consolidated School District in Silver City, New Mexico, and I had a board meeting I had to attend last night. So that clears that up. So those of you who thought it was a female that was going to be moderating, you didn't know. That was my wife yesterday doing the award thing. But first, what I want to do is quickly let our panel introduce themselves today on universal design for learning and the change that comes with it. So I'm going to start to my left here with Simone.
Sure. Hi, my name is Simone St. Clair. I am the Vice President of PAGE, which is the Pennsylvania Association for Gifted Education. And I also teach secondary gifted for grades 9 through 12. I also have taught online science this year to second graders. I'm also Vice President of my local teachers union, so kind of wear lots of different hats, and I have about 16 credits left for my doctorate. So a lot of different things. So.
That's impressive. That's good stuff. My name's Dan Naylor. I'm a real estate broker, and I'm the owner and president of the Institute of Real Estate Education. It's a school that my father founded, and we took it from 2012 from 0 up to one of the top performing schools, not only in Utah, but in a lot of the United States, one of the best rated schools as well, and through a lot of these things that we're going to talk about today. So I'm glad to be here.
Welcome, Dan. Hi, my name is Jill Diane Bittinger. I'm a lifelong dance arts educator and Montessori educator, finding my voice as an author with some books just completed right now about peace education, cosmic education, and the one I feel is most relevant to universal design for learning is teaching with the soul in mind. And I am excited to be here with this esteemed panel and finding my voice and my unique perspective as I contribute to the value of our transforming education.
Thank you, Jill. My name is Indresh. I'm the Vice President for SIFI e-learning. Unlike a lot of you here who are really focused more on the education side, my company, we work with corporations, some of the biggest names out there in healthcare, pharma, manufacturing, robotics, education. And the focus really is to, at the end of the day, the learning process remains the same. And I think one of the reasons why we got so attracted to universal design for learning was because it had such a great framework that focused on engagement, on strategic action, and on acquiring knowledge. All three pillars extremely important, not just for education in school, but also for pretty much every adult who's wishing to learn and to perform better. So thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Thank you.
So as you can tell, our perspectives on universal design for learning come from a multitude of different areas. Quickly, I just want to survey the audience. How many of you guys know what universal design for learning is? Raise your hand real quick. Okay. I had an interesting conversation today at lunch with one of my colleagues from Colorado talking about this, and it's interesting in the education world how it constantly keeps to be reinventing itself. We talked back into when I was growing up in high school about competency-based education and common standards, all the way up to now with universal design for learning. And UDL is based a lot on brain-based research and neurosciences today, which they didn't have back in the 80s and 90s. A lot of scientific research has been done on the learning styles of individuals, and that's where universal design for learning comes from. So as we look at it, it can be used in a multitude of areas, as you'll find out from our discussions and the questions that we have today. And also as part of that, there's been some misconceptions about UDL that I kind of want to clear up, because I know probably a lot of us in the education field thought that UDL was strictly a special education option. And that's where it's rolled out quite often, is to deal with those high-risk, high-needs kids in our special education departments in school. But though that's not what UDL deals with. It deals with common standards, common learning outcomes, and common skill development that can be used and differentiated so the kids learn at their own pace and own time and demonstrate their learning in a different way. And I go back to what Robert said yesterday. How many of us is mad as hell that we keep using tests as the only sole assessment for our kids' success? Raise your hand, okay? I mean, that's one of the key things that this helps do. It differentiates the learning and lets the students, whether adult, adolescent, pre-adolescent, show what they are learning in different ways. They can demonstrate their competencies in a lot of different ways. So UDL's become real big in education, workforce and economic development, which is part of my background as well. So as we look at that, the misconception is that this is a new thing. It's not. It's just evolved over time. We've gathered more and more information on the success of it. And I'll let Dan go into a little bit about the why of UDL in his area. He brought up some very good points in our prep for this. Why is UDL improving student outcomes in his area of work? So I'll let Dan comment on his for a little bit.
Thank you. So the wonderful thing, like they were talking about UDL, is how it kind of incorporates a lot of different methodologies and opportunities for people to learn different ways. One of the ways that it was interesting for me to kind of apply this is with teaching board games. Have any of you ever played a board game? Have any of you ever played a game called Monopoly? You almost don't even have to teach the rules to that one anymore, right? Because it's so ubiquitous. But did you know that there's 1,000 board games coming out every year? There's kind of a board game renaissance going on. And on the side, we've got kind of back home, we've got a board game convention that we run. And so with so many board games coming out, we have to figure out ways to teach people these new board games. Have you guys ever tried integrating board games into your learning in a classroom? Cool, yeah. It's an incredible way to get students engaged and kind of take them out of the classroom focus and give them a chance to kind of apply their knowledge in another way. But when you're teaching somebody board games, it's kind of funny because as you look around the table, everyone's there on purpose to play something that they love. But as soon as you start teaching the rules, all the heads around the table start going like this because learning is hard. Learning is work, you know? I teach adult education with real estate, and so the adults that come into our school, a lot of them haven't been in school for a long time, so they don't remember how hard it was to be in a classroom and to learn. So it becomes for them a new challenge to remember how hard it was to learn. So when it comes to a board game, we'll take the Monopoly example. If you start teaching people that if you roll the dice, it moves your thing, if you land on a property, you can buy it, they start to wonder, you know, okay, I know I can move a piece, I know I can get property, but what does that matter, right? What does that matter? Does anyone remember how you win in Monopoly? Is it the highest die rolls? Is it the greatest number of properties? That'll help, but that's not it. I saw somebody, how do you win in Monopoly? Money.
Bankrupt
Money. Money is the win condition, kind of like real life. Okay, that's not totally true, but it's a little too true sometimes, isn't it? But if you're learning how to roll the dice and move around the board, but the objective is to make money, then you can get really good at rolling dice, but yet that won't help you win the game, right? Those are two different things. But if you understand from the beginning that the point of the game in the game of Monopoly is to come out with the most money, then when they say you can land on this property and auction it, now you understand why you need to negotiate for the lowest price. Now you start to understand why you want to improve the properties and increase the rents right there, okay? So the why kind of transforms their mind into, it catalyzes. Instead of saying, how do I roll these dice, they're like, I've rolled dice a million times, what do I care, right? But as soon as they integrate the why of where you land and what you do on those spaces can accomplish, that's where they start to understand and put the things together to say, okay, now I get it. Now I have a reason to learn this, okay? Now I have a reason for it. Now Monopoly is a game that's almost 99% luck, right? There's a teeny bit of skill, and that's how I took all my younger siblings' money when we played, right? But mostly it's luck of the dice. Now real life's not like that, right? There's a lot of skill involved, there's a lot of learning, and so my adult students, when they come in to learn about real estate concepts of like agency, contracts, ethics, they, again, want to understand the why. Why do I need to know this stuff? And if you don't give them that, then the information doesn't mean anything. You know, you can present all the different things that you want them to learn, but they don't see an importance to one over the other, and it all kind of blurs together. Have you ever seen that happen with your students? Little hard for them to distinguish what's the most important in a classroom, right? Especially when there's sometimes the curriculum that you have to teach is different than what they have to know later on. Have you ever experienced that? In the real estate industry, we've got regulations, and most of the time those were made for a good reason, but you find people forced to like memorize the square footage of an acre over here, and then they go out in the field and they're working as an agent, and never do they have to know the square footage of an acre. Or if they do, they can just, how can they figure that out? Just pull it up on their phone, right? So why do they need to know that? Well, in all honesty, maybe they don't. And I've been talking to regulators about how we can change that. But if you can find that why, where they can apply it, and there was an example given yesterday, I think, in one of the classes where they were able to bring in the parents. You remember that if you were here? They brought in the parents into a classroom, and where a doctor was teaching these kids how the math and the English applied to their job as a doctor. And I thought that was so incredible, so applicable. And so that's what I love about that piece of the UDL is that if you catalyze the why, then students learn. It's like that triggers the muscle to contract, right? It triggers your brain muscle to, okay, let's absorb this. And that's really incredible to see. And not just sitting in a classroom, but sitting around a board game table, right? Doing a transaction in the business that I do. It's so incredible. So that's what I love about it.
Thanks, Dan. As I brought up earlier too, there's a large research base on UDL over history. And Jill brought up some very good points about the hard research base that she uses in her field. So I'm going to go ahead and let Jill. Can you tell us more about your connection with UDL and the research you found on it?
Well, certainly, and building on what you said, Dan, I think the neuroscience points to the fact that there are different networks of the way the brain works within our system, and one of those is the affective, what he is talking about with the why. So that is going to relate to why is it important. That's of course then a personally meaningful thing, and you're in that process you're going to tap in to the inner and drawing it out rather than just placing the outer values and putting them in. So that's a fundamental difference, and this is one framework that helps support this theme that we're talking about a lot within our conference. The other networks that we are addressing are the strategic networks and the recognition networks. So the what of the material and then the how of the material. And what UDL provides is flexibility, that there are technological tools to address these different needs, the different desires for learning, and that there's a lot more opportunity for flexibility and creativity than traditional education has given. And so that was exciting for me as a Montessori teacher because I already had been growing up within this framework as an educator myself, saying, of course we can have 3 different age groups. There's the primary, which is ages 3 to 6. You have junior elementary, ages 6 to 9, and senior elementary, ages 9 to 12. The whole idea within those frameworks is that you are working their personalized skills according to scaffolding, the popular technological or educational term for what their capacity is, each student, and working within the zone of proximal development, working with their different intelligences. All of these are very well researched areas that are tied into UDL. And they allow different strategies. So what I see is that how it relates to the Montessori environment is that their learning is much more side by side. There is a lot of personal motivation that you can work from your desire to explore a certain work, a certain area, that you create small group learning so that there's the same level, but it all is built around understanding and really knowing your students. So then there's a deep development of the community within the process as well, the community of the classroom. And I find it really exciting to have a whole nother framework that the Montessori just feeds into naturally and provides another context and language for these transformative themes.
UDL also deals a lot with diversity of groups. So I'm going to ask Indris to expound a little bit. Would you like to expand on how UDL helps address diversity in groups?
Yeah, absolutely. As far as UDL is concerned, when I was studying it, and there's a great website, CAST is the organization that developed UDL. So David Rose and Annie Mayer, they were both responsible for doing the research and then coming up with the concepts. The first time when the concept of UDL came in was really 1984, and since then it has gone through multiple iterations, but the philosophy still remains the same. And if you were to ask me what that philosophy is, I would describe that by 3 words. Number 1, it is inclusiveness. It includes everybody, no matter what their inclinations are, no matter what their habits are, what their structures are, who they are. Everybody is included, in that framework. Number 2, the thing that really jumps out at me is uniqueness. Everybody is unique from their contribution standpoint, from their interest standpoint, from their capability standpoint. So number 1, inclusiveness, including everybody. Number 2, even though you're including everybody, you're also realizing that everybody is unique. Everybody brings a unique capability, interest, mindset to the table, unique potential to the table. And the third thing is what I call wholeness. Everybody becomes part of that whole. Everybody works together, even though they're unique, but they're also part of the whole. So inclusiveness, uniqueness, and wholeness, these 3 things are the key, I would say, principles or qualities of UDL that kind of jumps out as someone like me who's not from the education sector, who's coming from more from the corporate education side, and I look at it and say, oh my God, this is something that is telling companies and organizations the ability to work together, the ability when you are teaching and when you are making sure that learners are coming into your programs, you're making sure that you're not treating everybody the same way. It's not one standard size, one size fits all. You have to also take into account that your employees, your customers, they also are different. They bring different perspectives to the table. And they are also unique in their own capabilities perspective. At the same time, they also make us better because as a whole, they all bring that flavor to the table where everybody works together with their own capabilities, their own interests, their own competencies. So you don't treat everybody with the same brush. So I think for me, that kind of stood out really quite dramatically, especially in the post-pandemic stage, where I think finally pandemic forced us to kind of step back and to kind of reflect, to kind of go inside and say, hey, are we doing the right thing? Is there a purpose to what we are doing? Is there a purpose to each of one of us individually? And again, the UDL concept comes beautifully to the picture because it says there's purpose to everybody. And everybody makes this collection so enriching. And so we have to take them into account when we are teaching, when we are designing our curriculum, when we are integrating technologies, because all of these make for personalization of learning.
Beautiful.
And that's a great point, Indris, which allows us to transition right to the next question. Understanding how this will work post-COVID, I think we learned a lot in the K through 12 sector about what we weren't doing right in the first place. With the online learning, I know the district my wife and I are associated with, we had to basically transition from traditional education to online education in a matter of 6 days. Actually, we had 3 weeks when the governor extended it even farther. So we had 3 weeks to all of a sudden do that. And our governor in New Mexico did a wonderful thing by saying all the work from March till the end of June wasn't going to count. So we had to promote everybody. So really, was it taken seriously by our students? So when we came back this year, this leads right in great to the next question we're going to have, is post-pandemic, we started looking at our designs of how kids could show learning other than us having them keep answering the computer quizzes. How do we get them involved in Zoom meetings? How can we do small groups in those types of settings? And each one of us have a different perspective from the area we've come from. So I'm going to ask the next question to Simony. You've talked about how college students learn differently from K through 6 learners. How has this UDL helped you with your instruction in your current positions?
So I held like a very different perspective maybe than more of all of you, but I used to teach K to 6 gifted, and then I went back to school and received my gifted endorsement and certification, and then allowed me to then go to grades 9 through 12. So I've seen many of my students grow from 5-year-olds the whole way to young adults. And I think for students, no matter what grade level they are, it's really about scaffolding their learning and individualizing that. And then ultimately giving students ownership of their own learning. I think that's really, the most important thing. And then two, being able then to, as we've seen different presenters present, is also just being able to realize that kids are uniquely different. And they all have strengths and weaknesses, and they all have a different type of learning style. And so when UDL looks at things, we want to definitely have flexible workspaces for our students. And then we also want to, for our assignments, we want to have options for them. So it can be, we talked a little bit about differentiation, but you can also do different activities by doing content or a process or then your product. And then the third thing is allowing, if we can give the students the ownership of their learning, we can become teachers, the guides on the side. And so that allows us freedom to be able to give valuable input and feedback to our students and to help them use their abilities and to be able to think beyond what they think is capable, and that growth mindset modality. And then the last one is just overcoming inequitable barriers. I think, as Indrich said, we need to make sure that it's all inclusive, not just for special ed kids, but all students.
Simony brings up a very good point. I think a lot of us learned post-COVID with the online. There's issues with connectivity. We've talked about this by many presenters here and those types of things. But one of the other things was the soft skills that our kids need and the socialization that they lost, and even in adult training programs that I deal with and I'm going to go to in a little bit. But I'm going to let Dan talk a little bit first from his world. You mentioned about teaching ethics presents its own challenges in the post-pandemic world. How do you apply UDL when you teach ethics in your professional courses for real estate?
Well, ethics is a really interesting thing to teach. They've been studying how best to teach ethics, not just for understanding, but primarily for application, right? In the world of, and of course my focus is in real estate, and in real estate an agent or a broker is representing another person, and so the ethics of doing what's in that person's best interest is core to the whole industry, that they need to have ethical people. And one interesting thing when you start teaching ethics to people is if you ask somebody, are you ethical, what are they going to answer?
Of course.
Of course. Me? Yeah, I'm ethical. Of course I am. A lot of my best friends are ethical, right? So when I wrote my new ethics class a little while ago, we actually titled it Ethics for the Already Ethical. But we looked up some Harvard studies, and one of those I found really interesting, which was Princeton has an honor code where, it's stricter than a lot of colleges, and they had they actually developed a week-long honor code training for all new students, where they would spend an entire week learning about the honor code, studying it, looking at ways to apply it. And as part of this Harvard study, they studied students as their potential or their actual practice of cheating on a test, okay? That's a good, clear indicator.
I never did that, Dan, in my college days. No, I will never say that. No.
Are you ethical, Curtis?
I think I am.
All right.
Has to ask my wife on that one. No, just kidding.
Well, she's out there. Let's ask her. Just kidding. Let's hold that. But they are studied, checked to see what effect did this week-long training on the honor code What effect did that have on a student's likelihood to cheat on an exam? Okay, so they had a control group of students who either attended other universities or did attend Princeton, but for some reason were exempt from that training. And they they had some special tests to see how they would cheat. I don't remember exactly how they did that. But then they also had those students who went through this honor code training and checked to see how likely they were to cheat. And how much difference do you think that would make to have a week-long training on the honor code? If we were to give like a percentage chance of an individual student cheating, what would you estimate an average student's chance of cheating would be? Well, if you ask them, they're all ethical, right? So probably they would say 0, right? I don't remember what the percentage was, but how much do you think going to a week-long training on honor code would change that? How much would that improve a student's chance to avoid cheating? Practically 0. Practically 0. Students who went through a week-long training were cheating just as much as students who didn't go through that training. So then, right, as educators, what we were just talking about, the why have this week-long training on the honor code if it's not doing anything, right? If it's not changing the behavior of those students. So it's a similar problem that we deal with when we're teaching realtors, is a lot of them, probably 100% of them believe that they are ethical, and I would actually agree with that, most of the time. I think most of us are good people and are trying to do what's right. I think most of the world is good people. I do think that's true. I think that's true, except when they're driving. But other than that, but when the crunch time comes, right, when that one little situation comes and you say, oh, they'll never find out about this, and it puts an extra $500 in my pocket. It's not hurting anybody, probably. It's those times when it's an edge case where you're like, okay, I'm a good person, but this isn't going to hurt anyone, or no one's going to find out about it, or those are the times when I think all of us don't know how we're going to behave when that happens. And so how do we make ourselves aware? So when we're talking about the why, everyone knows why they should learn ethics, except that all of us think that there is no why to learn ethics because we are already ethical. Mm-hmm. So that kind of undermines when we tell the stories about, oh, this person cheated here, this person, there was that college entrance scandal, right? Yeah. With people getting their kids into college without following the rules. How different are we from these people? And so in order to really understand the why, instead of just giving hypotheticals, we have to somehow bring it home. We have to somehow make it really relevant to the person. And so with ethics, one thing that I like to do is basically tell the stories that I've told today, things that kind of wake you up to the fact that, oh, okay, maybe, not that I'm not as ethical as I thought I was, but maybe I didn't realize how many opportunities there were to be unethical, or understanding, just waking ourselves up to the fact that we're all potentially susceptible to these little gray areas where we might step outside what we think is ethical because we self-justify it in the moment. And so when you're talking about integrating various methods of learning, this is where a textbook doesn't cut it, right? A week-long series of lectures doesn't cut it. We've got to have something that's more interactive, that's more personal, and that really speaks to people's hearts to teach these topics. And I'm talking about ethics, but this probably applies in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I'm going to build on what Dan just said. In my prior life, I was the state director of career and technical education for the state of Alaska. Do I have any Alaska brothers out there? Because I would really like to know how you're surviving this heat, because I know what it was like living in Alaska, coming down to the lower 48 with the heat and humidity. But when I was up there, we actually had state laws that legislated universal design for instruction. We had to put cultural standards, math, English, science, social studies, as well as employability standards in all of our courses across the board, whether you were taking a math class or you were taking a CTE class. But what really had the biggest impact, and it's had the biggest impact on me and my work with UDL, is aligning the industry recognized credentials and certificates, because those standards are set by the industry. You cannot negotiate those. You go to a doctor or a surgeon Do you know whether that surgeon had an A or a C on his exams? No. They get a medical exam, whether they get a C or an A, they get their doctorate degree, whether they get an MD with a C or an A, you just don't know what the quality of that person is. But you go to a welder, you know for a fact that that person has passed every industry standard at a 90% competency, passed every one of those, and those welds will not break. So when I started looking at this as the state CTE director, we started creating common curriculum across the state because 85% of our population is in rural Alaska. Try recruiting teachers to rural Alaska. You go to the North Slope where you have sun right now 24 hours a day and you have no idea what your sleep cycle is. It's difficult for that. But we started creating common courses based on UDL for those industry recognized credentials in priority occupations and sectors. Maritime, oil and gas, hospitality and tourism, which is huge with the cruise ships and everything that goes on in the state of Alaska. So we started developing that. Everybody knew what those courses were and what was expected out of them in order for them to get that credential or certificate. Then universities got on board and started aligning those to their degree programs. And then all of a sudden, you have companies like Exxon hiring those people that were doing the pre-petroleum engineering degrees and getting the associate's degree for Alaska Anchorage, regardless of what that kid was. You could have been a special ed kid. I'm going to fill you in on a little story. Ketchikan High School was the first school district in the United States to put a drone program in for 11 kids, and 3 of those were special ed kids. All 11 of those kids got hired by either the state of Alaska or the company they were working with that helped paid for their degrees when they did a cartography project for the U.S. Forest Service for the state of Alaska. We had one kid, actually now is the supervisor, making $150,000 a year, living in his living room in Ketchikan, Alaska. Doesn't even have to leave his house because he passed the drone process to get those credentials, get the flying credentials to be able to work for that company. You know what his GPA was before he got in the drone program? 1.9. He found his passion. He graduated with a 4.0 in the drone program through University of Alaska Anchorage. College student, first generation college student, Inuit. Shows you it can be done. He found what he did, and now he's working as a supervisor. And I think he may not, I've lost contact with him, but the last time I heard he's being recruited by the U.S. Forest Service to be there is making $200,000 a year. And I'm thinking, why did I go into that program? He's making a hell of a lot more money than me, and I'm associate superintendent of schools. And I'm thinking, we all got those stories of kids that have adapted to what's going on. And I think that's the important part of universal design, is allow kids to find their passion and be able to move it forward, whether it's in workforce development, in education, or whatever. This is universal across all programs. And you're seeing more and more of it, and I think you're going to see more and more of it at COVID because it gets kids engaged, attending, gets adults involved in their programs, dislocated workers. Right now, I'm also the vice chair of the Grant County Workforce and Economic Development Alliance. We're working on universal design programs for CDL and all those programs for people that are underemployed or unemployed right now, and trying to get them to get those skills and be able to do it. So I think this is going to be a pathway that's going to be very serious for us to consider in all areas of education and job training in the future. So this brings us up to our last question. We'll have time at the end for you guys to ask any questions. But this brings us up to the future of UDL. And I kind of prefaced it a little bit by what I was saying. But I'm going to ask Jill, what's your thoughts on UDL in the future? Best practices, those types of things that we can do, connecting to the why and all those things we've talked about today.
The themes that I hear apply no matter what the age, that people need to have a voice. They need to be invested in it, that because it touches into a core part of them, so that you're working from inside out rather than outside in. If you're manipulated and not really getting to feel personally involved, it creates a different ethical base than if you're invested in it and creating, having a voice in the say-so. So just in my brief example of being in the Scouts as a nature director this summer, I've seen a culture that's created because of their voice, that a high ethics base. They are trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly. They go through this characteristic qualities daily and state it and speak it. I feel like if as a classrooms we can have a voice. What are the characteristics that you value? How do we want to create our class? It's a very different dynamic than the teacher putting it on the students. So it's again about the theme of empowerment.
Okay. Indrish, your thoughts? We got a couple more, we just got a couple more minutes. I got the high sign, so we got to
Okay.
start wrapping this up.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Jill, what you spoke about, and Dan, what you spoke about, the key focus of UDL is on a pillar which is called engagement, motivation. And so that's what you both are really talking about, is how motivated, how engaged are you? And the one thing also to notice about UDL, it is based on brain science, on neuroscience. Engagement doesn't happen from prefrontal cortex. Engagement happens from your midbrain. So when you are teaching ethics, you are trying to influence your prefrontal cortex, your logical thinking aspect of it. But that is not what engages you. That, in fact, disengages you. It's the midbrain where you talk about motivations, where you talk about case studies, where you talk about real role plays, real life examples. Probably somebody lost their house, and you're giving that as an example, and that impacts you emotionally. And so the point I'm trying to make is that UDL is based on very specific science and research. And so it really helps us to use that research, to use those principles, and then to develop our curriculum, whether it is our design curriculum, our teaching methodology, looking at learning styles. Everything can be guided by the framework of UDL. So I really do implore all of you to go and look at www.cast.org, cast, C-A-S-T.org, and look at the framework that they have given. They have provided all the resources, all the clarity, and it's not like super rocket science. It's all based on common sense, which is then correlated with research. So everything kind of adds up. So I see great future for UDL, not just in school education, but higher ed, also corporate education, and probably in every area of life.
Yeah. Simone, I'll let you have the last closing statement. Your last thought.
I was going to say, the future is bright. And because of COVID, I think we've all learned that we can definitely think of learning and education in a different light. And really, we need students to begin to become more engaged in their learning, as well as being more persistent and being able to overcome challenges. And then self-regulation, being able to be accountable for their academic perspective, as well as their emotional and their social. And then the last thing is just communication. I think it really is about giving students that ownership of their learning and being able to have that relationship for mentoring, as well as for valuable feedback. So thank you so much.
Thank you, panel. I think it was a very robust discussion. We'll be sticking around for questions because I see Brian getting ready to head up here to be able to pass out the next awards, because I don't want to have the shepherd's hook wrapped around my neck to be pulled off stage as we go. Thank you, everybody, for attending. We'll stick around, and thank you.